You have an idea. You want to tell it to the world, but you don't know where to start. That's where Anchor comes in. They have the tools for you to edit, produce, and record your idea right from your phone or computer. It's the easiest way to reach and grow your audience. They publish for you to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major platforms. And to top it all off, they match you with advertisers so you can earn from your passion and your wonderful idea. So tell me, what are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started and follow your dream. Welcome to Disruptive Adventism. My name is Jose Briones, and I'll be your host for this podcast. This podcast is about discussing the polemical statements and practices that are part of the Adventist fabric, which in turn shape this belief system to be unique and relevant for today's society. Welcome back, everyone, to Disruptive Adventism. It's another series we are introducing, and Caitlin, our fearless and amazing co-host, is here with us. How's it going, Caitlin?
Hey, it's going pretty well. Good to be back. Good to be tuning in and chatting it up on our next topic today. How are you doing, Jose?
Doing well, a little bit tired. The year, man, January is over. I can't believe that. It's like, where did it go? We're just started the new year and bam, a month, it's over. So moving and doing all of those things has been keeping me busy, but it's crazy how it goes,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and January really went out with a bang up here in Michigan and all across the North or the Midwest, it seems.
Oh, yeah.
So here's to a lighter, less intense month.
Hopefully, yeah. I've heard temperatures are like record low, record breaking, super freezing, snow all over the place. So I guess it's been, crazy over there.
Yeah. It's been a time to just kind of hole up inside with some tea or hot chocolate and just wait it out.
That's good. And well, we finished our series on sexuality. Which one was your favorite episode out of all of those, Caitlin?
Oh, wow. It's hard to choose. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. I enjoyed hearing from Dr. Hinman. He's put a lot of work and effort into his studies and has seen a lot of people. But there's a lot of good input, a lot of great stuff that kind of came up in this series. How about you? What were the high notes for you?
I really enjoyed that one. I enjoyed your discussion on pornography, and definitely sex talk. I think that's kind of the foundation. We said it in our last introduction to a series. It's just talking about stuff. It's important. That's just what it is. If you don't talk about things, they just, hide under the rug and you'll never go to address them. So I think that's one of my favorite ones for this series. And as a reminder, I'm actually, shooting a couple of extra episodes coming up now in February with a couple of people that have reached out to us that are part of the LGBTQ community that want to, kind of put their voices out there and kind of explain, what's their journey in the church. So I'm really excited to start shooting the next sexuality series for the future. But our next series is kind of, it's February, so it's Black History Month. And we're going to be focusing on kind of African American contributions, to the church or to society as a whole, or how is it to be Adventist, and what are some of the unique things that the African American experience or African American contributions, Black contributions, bring into the Adventist fabric. And honestly, there are a lot, there are a lot that we can talk about, but we only have, a couple. We have a couple of interviews coming up, lining up, and I'm really excited about that. Now, Caitlin, I didn't grow up in the States. So for me, it's a little bit different, I came to this country and, I kind of learned, hey, there's a full month dedicated to kind of exploring Black History Month. How was it? Like, you growing up in the States, was it highly displayed every February, or was it just like a thing? Has it always been, when I came here, I think social media has taken a presence into making this kind of like controversy of like, we shouldn't have Black History Month because, Black history is part of American history. And, like the whole like, a lot of other groups will be like, oh, we need to have a White History Month. Like, that kind of seems to be something that kind of comes about every February, at least that I have been living here. Is that like a trend, like in the past? Do people say those kind of things since you've lived, all your life here?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because right now I'm living here in Michigan. But as I've mentioned before, I'm a Pacific Northwest girl. And so it's been interesting for me living in different parts of this country and seeing different population groups and seeing how different people interact with one another, and including this particular month as well. So when I was growing up, I lived in a pretty white community. we had a few African American kids in my class, a couple kids from Asia, but I grew up in a pretty Caucasian place. and still my experience was we still celebrate Black History Month. Still, like in elementary school, high school, it was still something that was discussed, that was talked about, and it was demonstrated to me as something that was important and significant, but definitely wasn't a whole month affair. It was, yes, this is what's happening this month, and so let's take a couple days to talk about it in class, or have an assembly, or have a special Sabbath service about this.
Okay. So do you feel like it was just kind of like, oh, this is kind of like our duty to, maybe showcase this like once a year, or like a couple of days a year, and maybe a month, but not like constantly? Was that kind of like, the feel? Of course, like you're in a very, Caucasian demographic, so that may influence a couple of things, or does influence a couple of things. I mean, your environment influences those things. But do you ever feel like you wanted to learn more? Is that something that people, I don't know, encouraged?
Well, I guess I would definitely agree with what you're saying, where it was kind of a sense of duty of like, this is what's happening in our country. We need to make sure that we talk about this and address this. That there wasn't as much of a Black community to really, enjoy and push and make this a bigger event than just a couple days out of the month. It was definitely treated in kind of like, this is something we need to talk about, but we don't really have a whole lot to say. And so looking back now, I think I definitely would have appreciated hearing more and having a bigger to-do about the whole month, because it is important. It's a very significant part of our nation's history. And I think that it is an injustice to ignore this, the major contributions and the history that has been interwoven with our country, with the African American population.
Yeah, and I mean, let's take it now into a little bit deeper, a little bit closer to home. How would you say, I mean, in your experience growing up here in the States, the church talks about African American contributions, or even for that matter, diverse contributions into like theology and kind of stuff like that, especially in the Adventist church growing up in America? How did you relate to that?
Well, again, I think location plays a part. There might be eloquent messages discussed from and stated from higher up in the Adventist community. But I think local churches is really where you see, the front lines of of diversity and diverse thought making an impact. And so I think that when you go from one church to another, you can get a feel, you get a read, you get an idea of the influences. Coming out here to Michigan, I got to see a whole lot more diversity celebrated and capitalized on, used in a very powerful way. And so I think I think being a global church means that we do have voices from all sorts of different people groups. I think we tend to have a bit more, we're a bit more weighted in some voices, some cultures than others. But I think,
no, it's just like I definitely see that now. Something that I think that we take for granted is kind of like the idea of representation. Because, for example, 2020 is coming up. Next year is coming up, and that's a big date, big year for Adventists, where, Adventists from all over the world will be in Indianapolis 2020. They'll be meeting there, and they'll be discussing very important matters. But one thing that they, kind of like go over is just this idea of who's going to represent us for the next 5 years. And sometimes I think that there is a lot of representation that does not really focus on the wide diversity of opinions and cultures, that are, part of the global church. And I think that that's something that, I think we need to change. And especially, I was not educated in the American system, until college. So for me, I came and I did not understand how little, it is, kind of explored in history textbooks, like, the contributions of diverse groups, like, or either African American or otherwise Latino groups. Like, there's so much history, like that you kind of have to pick and choose. But I think that introducing stories that are not as known really help you kind of put history into perspective and, like, kind of change it. One really good podcast that I really listen to all the time, like pretty much every day actually, is Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell. And, he puts a lot of things into perspective, like, how I was listening to one a couple of days ago on how like the song Hallelujah, like, was developed like in 1984, but it didn't really come to like acceptance or like widespread until like later. And it's just interesting to see, like, when you neglect history, you may make assumptions, or, you kind of don't learn from others. So I think that, within the church, we have a representation, and I think it's because of language, honestly. I don't really necessarily think that it's sometimes because of lack of representation in culture, but it's like, who speaks English? Like, I think that that's one of the bars, that is set. And I actually don't think that should be a bar. I mean, we live in a very multicultural world, right? But a lot of the materials that are prepared or kind of sent to, like, within the Adventist church are very, oriented towards the English population, English speaking world.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know, like, maybe you have some thoughts on this, but I think that that's a mistake, because most of our world church, it's pretty much making, most of its growth outside of the United States, countries where English may not be spoken, maybe Spanish or French, or I don't know, in Asia, Korean, or Chinese or Japanese. So I don't know, like, I feel like I hear what you're saying, and I think that we need kind of like a shift in that representation personally.
Yeah. I think we do a lot of English writing and then translating that into other languages. But what would it look like to have people who are not native English speakers and come with their own ideas and perspectives and have them write? And what if we translated that into English? What would it look like to have these different voices?
You know what? That's actually a very good idea. I mean, I never thought about that. I mean, as simple as it sounds, like, it's just like you bring someone that kind of, goes over the ideas in another language, and then you translate that into English. It may sound a little bit different, broken, or whatever, but that's pretty much how it sounds when you translate the things that are in English to Spanish, for example. I'll give you an example. Like, we have this ministries, like children's ministries in the church. It's called GraceLink. And when you translate that to Spanish, it doesn't really have the same power ethic, that was kind of given with like GraceLink. Like it translates to eslabones de la gracia, and like it's so long, number one, and it kind of loses like that succinct power of like, oh, GraceLink, like, you can say it in one like mouthful, like, so it's just I think I agree with you. Now when it comes to African American contributions, I think something that is very like a lot, that people are talking about right now, especially within our denomination, is just like after the annual council, one of the sermons was highlighting unbiblical worship styles, or plights for social justice, or separations, racial separations and stuff like that, and calling us to stand firm. And that was not only Ted Wilson's sermon. Like, there were other mini sermons that kind of highlighted that theme. So I mean, I'm not gonna put just the blame on one person, but we are going to talk about those topics throughout this month, because I think that those topics need to be highlighted. What's your favorite, like, within church, like, especially within Adventism, what's your favorite African American contribution to like the Adventist fabric today?
Well, probably my favorite contribution is something that we're going to be talking about pretty soon with Pastor Dr. Hyveth Williams, which is Black preaching. Black preaching is such a unique form of preaching, and it's invigorating, really. I love the style. I love the culture that just kind of, brings a passion. It brings passion into church. I think it can be very easy in Adventism to kind of disengage from emotion and just be very heady, be very, just very academic and thought oriented, and we kind of disengage from our emotions. And this is something that I think really reconnects us and gives us some life and brings about celebration. And so that's probably my biggest thing, is just loving Black style preaching. It just gets you going. It's great. How about you, Jose? What's your favorite contribution?
I really enjoy talking to Dr. Hyveth on that topic. I think she brings a lot of, important things, and I don't want to rob her from her conclusion, so I'm just going to wait and not say what she says about Black preaching, so I'm just going to let it speak once it comes out. But I think just one idea, that's like kind of like an African American contribution, a Black contribution to, is liberation theology. I'm kind of going like in the like, more theoretical realm, but that's something that's really explored, from out of the African American experience, especially in the United States. I think I appreciate, I'm going to be clear here, is certain kind of liberation theology. If you do readings into liberation theology, some of it may not be very biblically faithful. Some of it is, not all of it. But something that I appreciate about liberation theology is just the idea that, like Jesus did not come just to like pacify us or like, to kind of like make us feel good about ourselves, but to liberate us from sin, from the oppression that we have, let it be through societal systems, let it be through our own desires, let it be our own choices, whatever it is. Like, God is here to liberate you out of your oppression. And I think that that's such an important contribution, and that it's kind of like when you look at it through the lens of African Americans in the United States, they have a very particular experience that I think as Christians we can learn from, to not oppress other people, to help other people, to, look for the well-being of those who are not like us, and I think I also identify with liberation theology because although liberation theology was popularized, and especially you can look at it through the lens of African Americans, it also stems and originated a little bit from the Latin American theological framework. So we kind of have that shared kind of like ideology, because the United States politically now, not, and sometimes religiously, I guess, our denomination has made a fault, but has kind of brought, their ideas, the idea of colonization. Like, they take over, took over a lot of our countries, like, Latin American countries. But not only that, I think that, when you look at it from even here in America, like, a lot of churches in the United States, even though they may be from a Spanish background or a Black background or an Asian background, they don't reflect those cultures as much as I would like them to. I think that we're very uniform in the way that we celebrate our worship or preaching or anything. And anything that's different is kind of like threatening to a certain degree, And so I really appreciate that theme of liberation, because it allows you to kind of explore, your own system, your own way of preaching, your own way of, music, like gospel music, for example. Like, I like it. I personally like it. I listen to it, and especially when I'm with friends, like, that listen to it a lot, I definitely, enjoy that. It's not my favorite kind of style, but I appreciate it. And I think that that's what liberation does. Like, that allows you to appreciate something even though you may not fully enjoy it to the same degree that other people do. So I think that's my favorite kind of like African American contribution, like to theology or to the church as in general.
Awesome. That's awesome. Now, you mentioned something earlier in our conversation I kind of wanted to circle back to, if you don't mind. You mentioned how there is sometimes conversation about Black History Month of whether there should be a Black History Month. That there's kind of discussion, there's a little bit of controversy perhaps. Some people saying like, well, we don't need a special month for it because it should just be part of our everyday fabric, right? It should be just like American history. And you see this also kind of come up in Black Lives Matter, right? We suddenly have people saying, oh, well, all lives matter. You don't need to say Black Lives Matter because it's all lives. So we kind of have this tension that appears when we tend to bring up this population, this group, and say that we are setting this apart to acknowledge and to appreciate and to defend. This kind of makes me think of something that we're going to talk about in this series as well, which is our regional conferences. We have these conferences that are set aside, that are unique, that are special. And I guess not to dive too deep and get into that podcast too soon, but I kind of wonder your thoughts on that, Jose. What do you think about our regional conferences? What do you think about Black History Month? This concept of having something that is set aside specifically for this population, is that a positive thing overall? Is this ultimately detrimental in preventing equality? What do you think?
I think it's a really convoluted and very difficult conversation. Like, let me start with that because, whereas you may have thought, like, for example, I look at it from the political spectrum, right? After the civil rights movement, you have a lot of integration happening within society, and you continue to have more integration, which is a very good thing. It brings other people to connect with people from different backgrounds, to learn from their experiences, but in our churches, we didn't do that. We stayed, like, we had the state conferences, which are predominantly, white, just because that's the majority of the population in the United States. That's just, I guess a fact. I guess I will have to check into that, if it's a fact or not. But You had the state conferences, and then you had the regional conferences. But I think something that kind of we forget about the regional conferences is that they could be integrated. Like, we don't need this distinction from, regional to state, because, I mean, we're all brothers and sisters in Christ,
Mm-hmm.
I think we should start modeling multicultural churches, because that's where we learn the most. I mean, I can just think about, for example, going to Andrews, going to Southern, going to a college. It doesn't matter, whatever college it is. You stepped out of your neighborhood, which was probably very homogeneous. Most neighborhoods in the United States are very homogeneous, unless you live like in a very big city where you have like, different pockets of different immigrants, groups, or, groups of people throughout. But you moved out when you went to college from a homogeneous group, of people, a lot of Hispanics, in my case, for example, I related to, and then I entered into a scenario where I just met a lot of people from different backgrounds: white people, black people, Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos, Europeans, like, Germans, like, whatever it is, whatever you have, like, South Africans, Ghanaians, like, just different people from different backgrounds. And I started learning more, it kind of like helped me understand the world from many different perspectives. But in the church, we still have this separation, of state conferences, which have, oddly enough, like, state conferences and regional conferences, both of them have multicultural ministries. So state conferences have Korean groups, Spanish groups, and, like the dominant group, which will be white for state conferences. And regional conferences have Spanish groups, Korean groups, and then they have, African Americans, which will be their primary target demographic. But I really don't see the reason why we cannot integrate one way or another. Either the regional conference integrates to the state conference, or the state conference integrates into the regional conference. I think the main issue is, number one, money, and number two, power. So it's like, who gets the money and who gets the power? So it's like, if we integrate this conference into another, right? And I mean, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in depth. So I don't want to kind of like go into it, but it's money and power. Like, who's going to get the money from who, and who's going to get the power, as in like, who's going to be president, who's going to be vice president, who's going to be ministerial, who's going to be the pastor and in charge of this congregation. But I think that's the wrong way of thinking about it, because, the reality is like, we're all doing God's work. We shouldn't be competing to see who gets the most members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that the regional conferences phenomenon is something that we have here in the South, southeastern United States, like, all of the eastern states, from Michigan to the right, I guess, to the east. You have a lot of regional conferences where you don't see that phenomenon as much, I guess, in the West. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's also because of politics, just like the racial divide, the lack of racial reconciliation, the lack of, appreciation for diversity. I think that plays a part. And I mean, sadly, it plays a part into our church, and we need to get better at it. What do you think? Give me a couple of thoughts before we start closing out.
Well, I held for a long time the notion that regional conferences simply create further divide and do not allow for us to be a united front, to be a united, cohesive church in the United States. But I was recently having a conversation that kind of helped me see things from a new perspective, that unfortunately, the way that the system politically, how it has been set up for, the last several decades, there wouldn't be much voice given to particular minorities, right? We haven't been well organized, well equipped in a way that would allow for voices of the minority populations in our country. And so regional conferences allow for that in a way that that might not be possible otherwise. that kind of that helped me see and understand a little bit more that this is, an opportunity to allow for potentially greater ministry. I don't think that it's the ideal. I think the ideal would be for us to be a united, equal people with respect and consideration and celebration for everyone. I think given kind of where we're at politically and just as humanity, I think that the system might actually be helpful. Again, I still feel very new to this whole concept because, like you said, back west, where I'm from, there really aren't regional conferences. This isn't really a thing, and so it's something that I'm trying to wrap my head around and understand the different points of view and the different perspectives. And it seems like it could be a very positive thing, short term, but long term, I think you're right. Like we need to be a united and not uniform nation, but celebrating and utilizing our differences to further ministry and further God's kingdom.
And I think it's also like a matter of being uncomfortable, just like if you're uncomfortable with like ideas or other things that may come, I think that that's another part of the equation. Like, it's like the theological ideas or like the methodologies that people group uses may not be compatible with your context or with what your preconceived notions are, so you have uncomfortability right there that you need to kind of resolve with more openness. And that's why I think that the idea of liberating, like, liberating your, senses, like your just mentality, it really helps to be more open, to be more caring and loving towards others. So I think that's where, most of it stems. But any other thoughts, final thoughts that you have before we kind of start our new series, for this month? I know after the series, we're going to, or maybe even during, I think we haven't decided just because of the timeline of things. You had an interview for a movement, and don't reveal it yet. Like some people know, some people may not know. But I think that movement, it's really bringing a change into the Adventist church, and like kind of like a change in language and like maybe more acceptance and seeing that, everyone is welcome at the table. Isn't that the truth? Caitlin?
Yeah. I'm excited for you guys to hear this particular interview. And yeah, there's a movement that's kind of cropping up, a little grassroots movement that is sweeping slowly but steadily across our nation. And there's some good things. There's some wonderful and exciting things in the works.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see. Actually, if you want to know what the movement is, if you want to listen to that interview early, you can go to patreon.com/disruptive Adventism and you can listen and see what the movement we're talking about is. It's an interview that Caitlin did. But yeah, if you want to get the sneak peek, go to patreon.com/disruptive Adventism. I know I always say it, at the end, but I guess I'll say it here. It really helps us out. It really supports us. It allows us to, continue keeping the lights on in here and, keep supporting ministries. Something that I actually wanted to say is if someone here has an article or something, that wants or pertaining any of the topics that we'll be touching on our Black History Month or any topic, that you just want to share on, make sure to email us and we pay you for articles. That's a great deal, right, Caitlin?
That's right. It's quite a great deal. And you guys have already heard we had some people reach out during the last series and we're doing some interviews with them. And so we are definitely interested to hear what you have to say. We want to expand conversation and discussion. So if you've got some thoughts, please hit us up.
Yeah, we're pretty open, to kind of have new experiences and new things. Anything else, Caitlin? If not, I'll sign us out.
No, I think I'm just looking forward to hearing all the wonderful words of wisdom and insight that are coming up in these next few weeks. I'm really glad that we've got some great interviews lined up. We've got some awesome content giving honor to Black History Month. So it's going to be good, and I hope you guys keep tuning in with us throughout this series.
Yes, I agree. Thank you for listening, for those of you, and I hope that you enjoy this series. We're especially, highlighting African-American contributions this month, but we're going to continue highlighting the different contributions all throughout. We're going to continue interviewing people that may come from different backgrounds and everything. That's what we do here. That's what we try to do, to present new ideas and disrupt Adventism as a whole. I want to say thank you for listening today. We really appreciate your time. Rate us on iTunes. It really helps us, or your favorite podcatching app. It helps us to get out there. Give us a rating. It doesn't take long. You just go there, put 5 stars, 4 stars, and maybe a comment if you want us to improve on something. We've been trying to improve as much as we can. So just make sure to hit the, rating button on your podcasting app or whatever you use. It really helps us out. Besides that, go to patreon.com. Again, you can get awesome perks. You get cards from us, you get stickers, you get different hoodies and shirts, and you can ask us questions that, for future episodes or whatever it is. So just make sure to head there. And any feedback, please make sure, email us, go to our social media, follow us, give us a follow on Instagram or on Facebook. And whatever you want to do, refer us, give us, new content. If you want to talk, if you want to write, make sure to hit us up. Again, we appreciate your time and thank you for listening today. We hope that you join us next time. And as always, we invite you to be disruptive.